Before you repurpose your ice pick from breaking ice for your scotch into a blood-dripping instrument of death, take a deep sip and hear me out. Episode 6 of our hotly debated orchid care topics, using ice to water your orchids. Just 3 ice cubes a week and you're golden, like the sweet nectar in your whiskey glass that you're now throwing back to keep yourself calm. Now your job is done and your orchids will thrive. Or will they? And welcome to the Nature Company. Today we'll be going through the pros and cons of using ice cubes to water your orchids. And yes, there are pros to it. So sit back, hear me out. The science does prove that there is something to it. So let's take that ice pick, break it down into chewable chunks, so that we all might learn something. We might just take that ice pick too and puncture some holes in that theory. So stick around to the end and let's see which orchids might actually be best suited to this anyway. If this is the kind of information you're interested in, please hit that subscribe button down below if you haven't already, and that notification bell to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Let's look at the viewpoints and some of the scientific facts behind this to understand it better. Some growers think it's a convenient and controlled way of providing water and preventing overwatering, where other growers say that the cold shock on the roots is just going to damage your orchid and is very problematic. So let's look at both arguments and see what we can come up with. And those pro ice cube fanatics say that using ice cubes provides a controlled way of providing water to your orchid and limiting overwatering, because the major cause of death in orchids is by overwatering and drowning your plants. And with an ice cube or ice cubes, you are supplying a limited quantity of water to your orchids, and this water is slowly applied to your plant as the ice cube melts. So you're not giving it one big full whack of water, you're supplying it with a constant supply of water for a longer period of time without supplying too much water. And also by using ice cubes, you're putting your ice cube in at the base of the plant, thus you are not getting any water into the crown, so you're limiting the chance of crown rot. And the scientific reasonings are the gradual absorption of water, the root adaptation, and watering consistency. And it has been proven that orchids do absorb water in small quantities over time. And by providing it with ice cubes that are going to melt slowly and provide constant moisture for an extended period to the plant, you're actually mimicking what it would be getting in nature. The experiments that were done at a temperature of around 21 degrees Celsius shows that those ice cubes took around 5 hours to melt completely, providing long, slow release water to the orchid without any chance of drowning your roots. And the root adaptations of your orchids are the fact that the majority of the orchids that you are growing are actually epiphytic, and they produce that thick velamen layer on the outside of the root that allows them to absorb water, and they're only able to absorb small amounts of moisture at a time. So by supplying it with water for longer periods allows them to uptake water, the root adaptations. So with the majority of these orchids being epiphytic, they've adapted to being able to absorb moisture from the air and from the rain. So they are only able to absorb small amounts of moisture over time. And thus, one big soaking is not going to be enough moisture for them. And watering consistency. Ice cubes provide a measured amount of water, which will help limit root rot from excessive watering. Now that we have the anti-ice cube guys hot under the collar, let's look at their side. They say the risk of cold shock and root damage is too great to use ice cubes on your orchids. They say the ice will cause cold shock on the roots of tropical orchids because they are adapted to living in warmer temperatures. And with prolonged exposure to cold water, you may be reducing the metabolic activity inside the plant, as well as the ability for it to absorb nutrients. And by just using room temperature water, you're providing the plant with what it would get naturally from the rain, as rainwater is certainly not ice. And the scientific argument for this revolves around three things: tropical root sensitivity, nutrient uptake, and possible media breakdown. The tropical root sensitivity is almost quite self-explanatory in a way. These orchids are adapted to tropical environments and very rarely, if ever, reach really cold temperatures, and certainly not freezing point temperatures. So by being exposed for long periods to very cold temperatures can cause cellular damage. And when it comes to reduced nutrient uptake, studies have shown that cold stress in orchids can reduce the enzyme activity in the roots, which can lead to lower absorption rates. And this then can affect the growth of the plant and its flowering. And the media breakdown. What can happen when using ice cubes is, especially if your temperatures are still relatively cool but humid, your ice may melt extremely slowly. And this will cause a slow trickle of water from your ice and leave dry patches in your media. So you're not getting a constant watering throughout your media, which your orchid would prefer. And this can start causing problems in faster breakdown of the media. Also, if you have a more loose or open media, what may happen is you may land up with a single drip point through your media and your water will all run down a single point, leaving the media almost completely dry. And that's certainly not what trying to get water to your orchids is all about. And between these two, anti-ice and pro-ice, there's also an alternate to both of these, and it's the mid-ground. Growers that use small amounts of water constantly but using room temperature water. They're either using drip feed systems or misting systems to ensure their orchids get that slow amount of water constantly or regularly to ensure that there's no water stress in their plants. This is to mimic the natural uptake of moisture in your orchids, as well as limiting any chance of cold damage by using room temperature water. And this all works through the humidity considerations, because the orchids have the ability to absorb moisture directly from the atmosphere, and by keeping a humid enough environment around them, they can then absorb that moisture into themselves, mimicking what they would be doing in those trees out in nature themselves. So with these constant applications of small amounts of water, you're basically putting them back out into the jungle. And by using this method, you can also prevent crown rot by ensuring you spray or put your drip feed at the base of the orchid. So by ensuring you're watering from below, you're avoiding any excess water in the crown itself. Now that we understand the arguments, what should we do? Well, those scientific studies on using ice cubes for your orchids were done at Ohio State University and at the University of Georgia. Each of them had a batch of 48 Phalaenopsis in 4 different hybrids, divided into 2 groups of 24 orchids each. The first group was watered using ice cubes, 3 ice cubes once a week, giving them approximately 80 milliliters of water each week. The second group was given room temperature water, also 80 milliliters of water a week. And this experiment had been done over a 4 to 6 month period over the flowering period of these Phalaenopsis. And the results showed between the 2 different sets in both areas, there was no real discernible difference between the flower longevity and the display life of the flowering spike. So the orchids managed to flower just as well with the use of ice cubes as they did with room temperature water. So perhaps it can be considered a reasonable strategy for those people who want to keep their orchids in flower for as long as possible. As the majority of orchid death comes from overwatering, and using the ice cubes, you're actually only giving them a measured amount of water each week. And perhaps this will allow them to keep their orchids alive long enough that they can build up an interest in them and look into it deeper and further and understand what to do with them afterwards. So in this case, it could be considered 100% acceptable to use ice cubes to water your orchids. As the studies show, there's no damage to the aerial roots that are touching the ice, and it does not affect the flowering longevity or the display life. It is important to remember these experiments were done under highly controlled environments at 21 degrees Celsius with 40% humidity, with controlled lighting, etc., etc., etc. So it's almost going to be impossible to emulate this in your home environment. And although the use of ice cubes to water your orchids did not affect the display life of the Phalaenopsis. In 1 out of those 4 Phalaenopsis hybrids that were used in the experiment, one of them was severely impacted in the top growth. It had been greatly reduced. So this just goes to prove that ice cubes are not a long-term solution to watering your orchids, especially for one, since you're never going to be sure which hybrid you've got, whether they're going to be cold tolerant at all. And then we also have that argument about the ice not affecting the aerial roots. Yes, perhaps this is correct. They showed that the internal temperature of the roots only dropped to around 5 degrees Celsius, which is well above the -6 degrees Celsius that it took to actually do damage to the root itself. But then again, that was in that controlled environment with that 21 degrees Celsius. What then happens when your ambient room temperature then drops to around 15 degrees, which can easily happen in a home, especially during those winter periods? What's then going to happen to the application of ice to an even colder environment on your roots? For one, your ice is going to take longer to melt, so you're going to land up with cold stress for longer periods. And we can't necessarily say that is not going to damage your orchid. And also, when those room temperatures start to drop, this study was done again at the 21 degrees Celsius, and the temperature inside the pot was also at around 21. And when putting the ice onto the media, it only dropped the media's temperature to around 10 degrees Celsius. So again, if your room ambient temperatures are way down at 15 already, how low is that going to drop the temperatures in your media? They could possibly go well below 10 degrees. And science has proven that at temperatures below 10 degrees, you start having problems with your leaves. The cells inside start getting damaged and they can actually even collapse. So when placing ice on your orchid, first of all, you've got to ensure that your ice does not touch the leaves in any shape, way or form, as the point of contact will be damaged and will cause a spot on the leaf that will then die. So for one, there's no ways I can fit 3 ice cubes on this without touching the leaves. And for 2, if I do manage to, and the temperatures in the pot do drop below 10 degrees, I've got to ensure that none of my leaves are touching that media either. And the problem then comes in is right at the base where those leaves and the leaf sheath are in the media. That can then kill those leaf sheaths, and that will of course cause the whole leaf to die and fall off. So we have to be very wary of using ice cubes if we don't have ideal temperatures. And if our temperatures are high, what if we've got beautiful warm weather, 30 degrees, 28 degrees, can we then use ice? Well, that could also be very problematic, because now you're causing a big temperature shock in your plant. You're dropping the temperatures by between 10, possibly even 25 degrees in a fast single blow. And who knows what damage that could cause to the cells of the plant. There's been no specific scientific studies that I know of on this, so I can't be definitive. But to me, it just, but then again, am I ever really definitive? There are too many variables in orchid growing, and that allows a lot of people to do a lot of different things to their orchids that have never and will never work for me, but work for them brilliantly. So don't ever put ice cubes on your orchids. Unless, of course, you want to keep them as cut flowers and you just want to keep the flowers alive for as long as possible in your home, then go ahead, use ice. And the only people that will then love you are the commercial growers who are making money from you. But also remember, only do this with Phalaenopsis. None of your other orchids are going to like it in any way whatsoever. So if you're going to kill an orchid, kill a Phalaenopsis slowly. And if you don't understand a word I'm saying, don't worry, I forgive you. Ed posts up a lot of information in written format in that Buy Me a Coffee link down below. Feel free to go down, have a look there. There's a lot of information available to everyone. And there is also some members-only content. So don't be shy, sign up, become a member, and grow like a pro. And thank you for watching. If you have found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button down below, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.